So, these are not the only adaptive challenges. They're simply the big ones that I think are really need to be focusing on. You need to think about the adaptive challenge of being a 10-decade church. The adaptive challenge of addressing the 5 unique generational identities. The adaptive challenge of reaching all our families in all their different styles and structures. Being able to address at least the 3 or 4 religious spiritual identities of people today, which is just going to call us to personalize and to target and be more inclusive. To address the decline in religious transmission and practice at home and the corresponding decline in participation in church life and programs. I think that's a 1-2, by the way. I think the more we are able to help people at home, it's going to spill over into participation in church life. We've got to resist the temptation of short-term solutions of getting people back to Mass on Sunday. I watch in the States, watch dioceses spend millions of dollars on things like, Catholics come back to Mass. There's a variety of these programs. And there are short-term fixes for big-time adaptive challenges. And so people do. They come back for 5 or 6 weeks. And they usually do it like around Lent. Well, if you're going to get people to come back to church, Lent's kind of like a no-brainer, right? Do it in July and see how it works. If it works in July, then maybe I'll change my attitude, but. And then lastly, I think the digital culture presents opportunities. We have to learn how to use it, but I think the new technologies and media create transformation in every aspect of life and give us new methods of engaging people and accessing great content. But when you think about it, if you're getting people even a couple minutes a day to pray, reflect, and the rest, but you look at it over a year, that's a lot of time, and it becomes a routine, it becomes a habit. I share with people, so Lent is coming up, like really, really soon. Okay. People say, well, people come for Ash Wednesday, then they go on vacation and come back at Easter, right? Well, that's the reality. And I think if I could do something like that, have some digital content on the platform, engage people just 10 minutes a day, Bible reading, devotion, something. Over 40 days, that's 400 minutes. That's a lot of time. You'd never get them to come to church that much in those 40 days. So, but if you blend it, so the relationship, we're coming to you, remember, we're here on Sunday, or we're here Friday night for our Stations of the Cross, the rest. You now have a relationship with people because they're using you in the digital world and in the physical world saying, join us. We have a simple meal followed by Stations of the Cross. We have a Lenten mission. Join us for 4 nights. But if you don't have a relationship, those messages just don't come across. But if they're using what you send them, then you invite them and you have context. That's what the digital provides that kind of relationship building. Connect with people before the experience, then follow up the experience with, and all of a sudden you have a little, you have a whole little platform so that what you do on Sunday has legs. It connects broader than that. It's not just the hour. We've got to maximize our time with people, and the only way to multiply time, I think, is to do things like that, where you multiply the connections you have with people. And sometimes the connections are at church, sometimes the connections are in social spaces, digitally. Here's the benefit of some of the social media stuff. It's a habit. And it used to be when we were growing up, faith practices were habits that were woven into the fabric of the day. Well, if I know people are checking their Facebook pages, going online and the rest, how can I make the daily devotion a habit so that every day you do it and you look forward to it and you build it into the time of your day? Maybe 40, 50 years ago was praying the rosary, once a week in the car on the way. And it's still good to do. But this has different forms. It's the same thing. It becomes a habit of faith. That's what I talk about at home in terms of how important that is. So far, so good? So reimagining. We're going to look at a new ecology, how to focus on faith maturing across the lifespan, and these key faith-forming environments. You already got a preview of the digital. So I want to talk about faith-forming ecology, but I want to contrast it. I was born in 1950 in Bridgeport, Connecticut, right on the coast, about 60 miles northeast of New York City. Okay. So much so we got New York City TV channels and radio and all the rest. I grew up in a neighborhood, mostly Italians, a couple of Polish. I don't know how they got there. They were almost all three-story houses, and everybody in that house was related. Okay. In our case, it was an Italian house. Grandma and Grandpa lived on the third floor, from which they could watch everything. But every grandparent lived on the third floor, so they could watch everything going on in the neighborhood. So I grew up in an Italian household. I grew up in an Italian neighborhood. I went to an Italian Catholic parish. I think there were only like 6 last names in the whole parish. They came from 3 or 4 towns in Italy. When they came over, they brought their Italian pastor with them for fear they get stuck with an Irish pastor. They built their church, okay? And there were 2 Italian churches in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Holy Rosary, when I went, and St. Raphael's. They were about, a mile and a half apart. But St. Raphael was Sicilian, so they really weren't Italian. Our Italian Monsignor never did any community building. 0. Why? The community came in for Mass on Sunday, and the community left after Mass on Sunday. Everyone was related. They're all Italians. They all knew each other. Too much about each other. They lived in the same neighborhoods. They shopped at the same Italian grocery store, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then the festivals through the year and Christmas midnight Mass at midnight. Well, I was, it really was a midnight Mass, not 4:30. These were the things that stitched together the day. But the parish never, ever assumed it was the center of faith formation. That happened where? At home. As long as you had grandmas and grandpas who passed on the faith to moms and dads, who passed on the faith to kids, you prayed the rosary at home, you had devotions at home, you had your prayer book at home. I was a public school kid, went to Catholic school eventually, but a public school kid. So I knew there were other people except Italian Catholics. They were wrong, but I knew they existed. But you could grow up in this environment, and it was it was almost like there was no chance at 18 you were going to be anything but Italian and Catholic and Italian. Because you were nurtured in it, immersed in it, socialized in it. Today we call that an ecology. It's home, neighborhood, parish, relations, all stitched together. And where the Catholic school was a part of it, like for my brother, the Catholic school played a role. So all those institutions working together. We now find ourselves in 2018, and that naturally forming ecology, because ethnicity drove it, the naturally forming ecology no longer exists. It does in pockets, but it's not the norm anymore, it's the exception. Catholic faith formation relied on the ecology to do the work. I went to release time CCD classes with the Baltimore Catechism. Monday afternoon, we left public school an hour early, and I had to go across town, but took the bus and went to CCD class. And the nuns from the school, and they were nuns in those days, they weren't sisters, they were nuns. They came across from the school with their wings on and the rest, they kind of flew across. And they came into the church. It was non-graded, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. Okay, because we had first year because of confirmation by age 5, by grade 5. So this was real religious education. And their methodology was pretty simple. In September, you started with question 1, And each week you did 1 to 15, 16, you got the general drift. And you would stay as long as the sisters thought that you responded well. So you couldn't waver, you couldn't read out of the book, you had to do it from memory. So if you weren't clear on who made you, you were gonna work with that for like 5 or 10 minutes so you got it right. And if you couldn't name the 7 sacraments or what a sacrament was, you were just gonna, so sometimes class was a half hour, sometimes it was remedial was an hour, all right? Well, it wasn't bad in the fall, but by the winter time, the Italian Monsignor turned the heat off in the church after the Sunday Mass, right? And so, like Monday afternoon, you had your coats on, like gloves on. And the nuns came over, and they were just, the cold didn't bother them at all. They were the same gals year round. 7th grade, September, guess what question we started with? Question 1. And we did it again. And I thought, after a couple of years of doing this, you should really get the answers like who made you and how many sacraments there were. So I opted out at 7th grade and said, I'll stop at the Jane Street Public Library and read during this time. Then I'll take the bus back home. And for 2 years, that was my religious education. Because once you got the answers, you were done. What else was there? Because faith formation didn't rely on what? The Baltimore Catechism. There was nobody who came in grade 6 who didn't know who made them. There was nobody who didn't know why they were made, to know, love, and serve God. Who didn't know that a sacrament was a sign instituted by Christ to give grace. After that, by the way, everybody goes down dramatically in their responses to questions. They knew that because you grew up in that environment. That's the ecology teaching. No one relied on the 1 hour a week. Well, what happened is the ecology receded. What was left? The 1 hour a week, all by itself, little island. Or a school all by itself without the surrounding ecology trying to do religious education. And it was never meant to be that way. If you're preparing children for First Eucharist, and you've got to spend 4 weeks teaching them the Our Father, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So we need a new ecology. That's the big picture. A new ecology that works on its own, that we create and build and that works in sync. Because when I grew up, it worked organically. It simply communicated faith. We need to bring our intergenerational community front and center. Intergenerational relationships and intergenerational experiences. There's so many kids who literally can go all the way through confirmation into high school and never ever learn in a setting other than an age group, grade level. They never have any contact with the intergenerational community. And we know from research that every child and teenager needs at least 5 adults in a faith community who know them by name. This is a research study that goes back to 1974 with Merton Strawman at the Search Institute. Being known by name in your community is one of the predictors of faith maturity. That's all intergenerational. So how do we strengthen our intergenerationality as a community? People knowing and interacting, like that app Sunday. Oh, sure, it's about the apps and the technology, but it's really about storytelling. It's the storytelling between the younger and the older generation. It's the relationship that starts there and continues all year long. So we don't want to be an assembly of people. We want to be an intergenerational community where people know each other, share stories with each other, share faith with each other, share ministry with each other. We get intergenerationality for free, but we're not intentional about it. We can be. Second, we have to work in family faith formation at home. We have the tools to do it. So strengthening families, and by that I mean grandparents, parents, and children at home. So all those old people like me you have every Sunday, stop thinking of us as old people. So next Sunday, imagine they all had a mask, one of those stick masks, okay? But on it was their social network. Because every older adult brings at least 100 people to Mass on Sunday. Their kids, their grandkids, their neighbors, their colleagues, the rest. So they represent their family system. How many churches do you know are making grandparents a priority to help them become faith formers of their grandchildren? You got us. You got us for free. You don't do anything to get me to go to Mass on Sunday. Zero. We are as low maintenance as the word low goes. You got us. And every Sunday we're there, and you don't equip us to share faith with our neighbors or with our grandkids. My own kids might be pagans, but I haven't given hope on my grandkids. And so how do you equip me throughout the year to share faith with my grandkids, wherever they are, next door or across the country? They are an asset sitting right there every Sunday, but don't look at them as an individual, look at them as a social network. And every grandma is on Facebook. Not because they want to be technologically hip, because that's the only way they're going to find out what's going on with their grandkids. Because nobody calls anymore. In fact, hardly anybody texts anymore in the family system. They're on Facebook. That's where the videos are. That's where my science project is. It's on Facebook.
Instagram. My kids have
Or Instagram.
Facebook's only for old people.
Yeah, that's true, but that's the intergenerational part about it. So grandparents on Instagram, grandparents on Facebook, what are they doing? They're staying connected. Then we need faith formation across the whole life cycle. Children in the first decade, adults in the 9th or 10th decade. And different at every stage. In the old land-based faith formation, 10-decade lifelong faith formation was really, really hard. In the digital world, with all the digital resources, today is Saturday. By Tuesday or Wednesday, we can have adult faith formation up and running in your church. Just given all the great digital content available that people can access and how we can form small groups around that with no problem at all. Lent is coming. You know how much Lenten content's out there? Devotionals, and it's all free. So if people aren't engaged in Lent, you should be saying, well, what am I doing? I should be doing this. And then we have to be missional. How do we use all our resources, tools, and people? Every one of those older adults can be a missional person for you. They're the delegate back to their family system to share the gospel and invite them into relationship with Christ. If you equip them, let alone the digital tools and resources that are available to you, and the programs that are available to do missional work. But this is faith formation out in the world, at the Starbucks, at the local cafe, at the wherever. This is going off campus to where people live. If we can set up a faith-forming ecology, build that, and that begins to work, it becomes self-replicating. That's the real big picture. That's what we're missing. That's what we're missing. But it can be built. And the digital is simply an enabler. It's an accelerator. It doesn't replace any of that. It accelerates it. It gives us modern day tools to make this work. But it still comes down to relationships and interactions and experiences. Does that make sense? You can't plan this. We're going to plan projects around it. But that's the big picture. That's why so many things we do don't work as well, because they're missing this supportive context. Once you get that supportive context, things start to work. Second, maturing in faith. Oh, time's good, okay. So here's the big piece. One of the biggest problems of faith formation is what I call start and stop catechesis or faith formation. We do a lot of start and stop. We have huge, like if you looked at faith formation in most churches, not yours, but other ones I know, it looks like a slice of Swiss cheese. There's just these big gaps in between the cheese. These big holes. So what do you do with that group? Oh, nothing. Well, that's like 2 decades of life. We don't have any time for that. What do you do with young families? Oh, we don't have time for that because we'll wait for them to start school. Then we'll be okay. Well, we know they won't be okay. So oftentimes when we think about faith maturing, we've got these big Swiss cheese holes in lifelong faith. But also, we don't think about where do you want people to be in terms of maturing in faith? And what's the unique contribution of every decade of life? The reason why we front load so much into these 10 years between grade 1 and grade 10 or 11, we front load so much because we don't have a lifelong view of how faith matures. Nobody in this room got it all by the time they graduated high school. Because there was so much more life in which faith had to relate to and connect with. Nobody had this unbelievable relationship with Christ by 18. You had the foundations of that. And it grew and matured over time. The problem is we tend to focus just in a particular area. What I want to say is, what are the characteristics of faith maturing you want to promote? And then what does each generation or each decade need to contribute to that? So see the really big picture. Towards what ends are you working? And how do we help each age group move towards that goal? The General Director for Catechesis, paragraph 80. The definitive aim of catechesis is to put people not only in touch, but also in communion and intimacy with Jesus Christ. That is never, ever completed. We are always disciples. We've never arrived. Starting with the initial conversion of a person to the Lord, moved by the Holy Spirit through the primary proclamation of the gospel, catechesis seeks to solidify and mature this first adherence. It proposes to help those who have just converted to know better this Jesus to whom he has entrusted himself, to know his mystery, the kingdom of God proclaimed by him, the requirements and comments contained in his gospel message, and the paths he has laid down for anyone who wishes to follow him. It's still the best description of what we're all about. One paragraph. I'll come back to this one. Christ's method of formation was accomplished by diverse yet interrelated tasks. So when we think about faith maturing, we should think about it as growing in knowledge, growing in worship and celebration, growing morally, growing in prayer, growing in community, and growing in service to the world. And at every stage of life, that looks different. And so when I say, think about faith maturing over a lifetime, this is why we do lifelong faith formation. This is why we engage the intergenerational community. This is why we engage families, because faith takes a lifetime to mature. It's never complete. We're always the disciples. We're never the master. So you'll see this in the materials, and we're going to work with it next time in particular. But I've tried to focus people on what are the qualities or characteristics of faith maturing you want to work towards. And then if you said that's our vision for faith maturing, then how do we help people at every stage of life grow towards that? So just as an example, sustaining a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, making the Christian faith a way of life. You can see this at every stage of life. Developmentally will look different, but it's the road you want to put people on. Possessing a vital faith, being aware of God's presence in my life. Seeking spiritual growth. Living a life of service. Sharing the good news. Participating fully, consciously, actively in worship. Being able to articulate the fundamental teachings of the Christian faith. And again, at every stage of life, that will look different. Exercising moral responsibility as a Christian. Practicing faith in Jesus. Discerning and using my gifts for the benefit of the community and the world. Exploring God's call to vocation and how I express that vocation in my life. And possessing a positive spirit. Yours might be different. But we should have a vision of this is the maturity And then how do we help people grow towards that maturity in faith at each stage of life? Does that make sense? So I'm not concerned with what happens just with children. Kids are really, really important. But so are old people. I'm concerned with what happens at each stage of life as we work towards this is faith maturing, blossoming, flourishing. If we take that perspective, we can begin to say, what do I need to do at each stage of life towards working towards mature Christian faith? Thoughts, questions? This is a big concept because we're going to talk about personalizing faith formation is to help people grow according to these characteristics. If we said, these are the ends towards which we're working, then I can drop back to the question, what should we do with children? How do we help children do this, this, this? What do you do with teenagers? How do we help them? And so it becomes a roadmap across each of the decades of life. What does it look like people in their 20s and 30s, people in their 40s, etc.? So it becomes that roadmap that I'm trying to help faith mature. Go back here. Putting people in community intimacy with Christ, helping them dig into discipleship, but I'm doing it in developmentally and life stage appropriate ways. But I'm working with one vision. So it's not like I have a vision for children, which is different than teenagers. This is the start and stop I'm talking about. And I have no vision for adults. If you had one, all of our efforts are going towards these characteristics of faith blossoming and flourishing, then that really can anchor what I do in the church and make your life easier, not harder. Does that make sense? See, what often happens in parishes is that we get really good at this and think that's faith formation. They know the stuff. Well, it's one of the 6 interrelated tasks. It may not be the most important one. Okay? So this interrelated task points to me to say, those tasks go across the lifespan. My characteristics are a way just to kind of personalize it. But if you think of faith formation as promoting knowledge, liturgical education, moral, teaching and pray, community, and missionary or service, that's an anchor that you can use across the whole span. So we don't develop a haphazard approach, we develop a lifelong approach. And so I don't have to start all, like I don't have to do every stage of life at the same time. You know. But if I was saying, out of this, I really want to work with faith formation with the first decade of life. Or I really want to work with faith formation with our mature adults, 60s and 70s. This gives you a template to work from. This gives you characteristics to work from. That simplifies my task. Because this is what I want to see flourish in people's life. That's what I'm trying to get at. It's big. Workshop 2 will kind of dig more deeply into it. But I want you to see, it's about faith maturing. It isn't about programming. It's about faith maturing.